Welcome to the debate. Today, we're dissecting a career that really serves as a perfect stress test for the American dream, the creator economy, and the limits of free speech. We are looking at a figure who is perhaps the ultimate Rorschach test for the American media landscape. I'm talking, of course, about Adam Carolla, a man who started as functionally illiterate carpet cleaner in North Hollywood, only to build a digital media empire from a garage that fundamentally changed how audio is consumed.
And a man who, depending on where you stand, is either the last honest voice in a sanitized culture or a tragic example of how anti-woke grievance can rot a comedic mind. It's February 15th, 2026, and we're looking at this legacy in the wake of two very polarized events. His induction onto the Hollywood Walk of Fame just last year, and the news that broke this January about his headline appearance at the newly renamed Donald Trump and John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Arts, a gig that, many of his peers refused.
Which brings us to the central question we're here to discuss. Does Adam Carolla's legacy rest on his role as a revolutionary pioneer who democratized broadcasting, or is he defined by a descent into divisive rhetoric and isolation? I'm the advocate, and I argue that Carolla is a visionary, a proof of concept for the independent creator who values meritocracy over approval.
And I'm the dissenter, and I argue that Carolla's trajectory is a case study in diminishing returns. While his business acumen is, I admit, undeniable, his content has calcified from the innovative comedy of The Man Show into a repetitive loop of exclusion and grievance. I believe he demonstrates a tragic shrinking of perspective.
Okay, so let's start with the engine of this machine, meritocracy. You cannot understand Carolla without understanding the sheer statistical improbability of his existence. We're not talking about a nepotism baby or some polished theater kid. We are talking about a guy born in 1964 in Los Angeles. Parents separated, a chaotic home life where he essentially raised himself. He barely graduated high school. In fact, the school held his diploma over a library fine.
A fine he famously paid on camera during the Adam Carolla project. Right. I know the lore. It's a compelling origin story.
It's more than lore, it's his operating system. It is the foundation of his entire worldview. When he was scraping by as a boxing instructor and a carpenter, he wasn't networking at cocktail parties, he was working. So when he finally broke into radio with Loveline in 1995, and later when he shattered records with the Adam Carolla podcast, it wasn't luck, it was the carpenter's work ethic applied to media. He holds the Guinness World Record for the most downloaded podcast, nearly 60 million downloads between 2009 and 2011 alone. He didn't just participate in the podcasting revolution. He built the infrastructure for it.
I don't dispute the hustle. The shift from terrestrial radio to the pirate ship model in 2009 was a masterclass in pivoting. When KLSX flipped formats to top 40, most DJs would have just, scrambled for another contract. Carolla went home, set up a server, and launched. That takes guts. However, you're conflating how he built the platform with what he's putting on it. You call it meritocracy, I call it a closed loop. The innovation stopped at the distribution method. If you look at the content over the last decade, the books, like In 50 Years We'll All Be Chicks, the documentaries like No Safe Spaces, it's not comedy, it's a lecture. He has traded the wit of crank Yankers for the predictability of a political rally.
See, I think you're mistaking consistency for predictability. But before we get into the content of the books, we have to address the pirate ship concept because it anchors his entire defense against the industry. You want to talk about innovation? Let's talk about the patent troll lawsuit. This is the crucial insight most critics miss when they dismiss him as just some podcaster.
The personal audio case. It was a significant moment, I'll grant you that.
It was existential. In 2013, a company called Personal Audio sued his network, claiming they owned the very patent on the concept of playlist-based podcasting. They were shaking down everyone. Carolla could have settled. It would have been cheaper. It would have been easier. Instead, he crowdfunded $475,000 from his listeners to countersue. He fought to invalidate the patent to protect the entire medium for every creator, big and small. That is not the act of a selfish grifter. That is a pioneer defending the frontier.
That was, without a doubt, his finest hour. It proved the power of his audience and secured the legal safety of the medium. But I look at that victory in 2014 and I see a turning point in his psychology. It seems to have emboldened a me against the world complex that has, I think, degraded his artistic output. It validated his feeling of being under siege, which he then projected onto everything else: culture, gender, race. He saved the village, yes, but then he built a wall around it and started yelling at the neighbors.
Yelling or just refusing to whisper. This goes to the core debate of authenticity versus offensiveness. Carolla's brand is unfiltered truth. The reason he held that Guinness record wasn't because he was polite. It was because people were desperate for someone who sounded like a human being, not a PR statement.
But what is the quality of that truth? That's what I question.
The quality is raw observation. He treats everyone equally. He roasts his own parents, his own lack of education, just as hard as he roasts society. I mean, he lists his middle name as Lakers on his driver's license. He isn't asking for reverence. His philosophy is libertarian at its core. If you're not hurting anyone, do what you want. He sits on the board of the Marijuana Policy Project. He advocates for nuclear energy. He isn't some cookie-cutter conservative. When he says things that upset the status quo, he is voicing the frustration of the everyman who feels that language is being policed to the point of absurdity.
See, I take issue with that equal opportunity offender defense. It implies a balance that just isn't there. There's a difference between roasting a peer and punching down at a marginalized group. You call it raw observation, but a lot of the time it sounds like willful ignorance.
Okay, give me an example. Where does he punch down rather than just making a joke you find distasteful?
The record is full of them. I mean, take his comments on the Philippines. In 2010, on the podcast, he called Manny Pacquiao an ignorant fool, and then dismiss the entire nation as having nothing but sex tours. Or go back to Loveline, calling Hawaiians dumb, inbred, and retarded. These aren't intellectual critiques of culture, they're lazy stereotypes that rely on the lowest common denominator, and when he's called out, he retreats to, "I'm a comedian." But then he writes books like President Me or goes on the O'Reilly Factor. You can't demand to be taken seriously as a social commentator and then hide behind, "it's just a joke," when the commentary is vacuous.
The Pacquiao comment was in the heat of a live broadcast. Reacting to Pacquiao's own controversial statements about gay marriage, by the way, it was a counterpunch. But look, Carolla has apologized when he crosses a line. He explicitly apologized for the Hawaiian comments, but he refuses to be held hostage by the most sensitive listener. That is why he survived the cancellation of the Adam Carolla show on KLSX. The market spoke. The reason he's still headlining in 2026, appearing at the Trump JFK Center when others fled, is because the audience trusts that he isn't filtering his thoughts through a PR firm.
Oris, the audience that remains is the only one that tolerates that specific flavor of bias. This brings us to the business model: independence versus isolation. You frame his career as a triumph of independence. I see a progressive isolation that has hurt his product.
How is he isolated? He has a massive network. He's constantly touring.
Look at the creative trajectory. The Man Show worked because he had Jimmy Kimmel, a softer, more charming presence to balance Adam's edge. Crank Yankers worked because he had Wanda Sykes and Daniel Kellison. There was friction, collaboration, different viewpoints. As he moved into the Ace broadcasting era, the circle tightened. He fired his sidekicks. He replaced them with people who agree with him. Even his firing from The Celebrity Apprentice back in 2012 was foreshadowing.
Oh, that was reality TV theatrics. You can't base an analysis of his business model on a game show.
But it was a psychological reveal. Donald Trump fired him because Carolla failed to utilize Mario Andretti, a racing legend, during a car-themed task. He tried to do it all himself. He ignored the assets in the room. I think that is the metaphor for his last decade. He stopped collaborating with peers and started broadcasting to acolytes. He traded a mainstream audience for a niche echo chamber where his ideas are never challenged.
I completely disagree with that characterization. First of all, true independence requires the strength to stand alone. When the industry shut the door, he built his own house. And he didn't just build it for audio. He leveraged that cult audience to fund films like Rode Hard. That isn't isolation. That is a direct-to-consumer revolution. He bypasses the studio system entirely. And regarding the Trump JFK Center, appearing there isn't playing to the base. It's the ultimate risk. He goes where the heat is. He is prioritizing the audience over industry approval, knowing he might get blacklisted by the mainstream.
Is it a risk to play to a room full of people who already bought your book? That's not brave. That's fan service. Real risk would be trying to win over a room that doesn't think dudes are funnier than chicks, a sentiment he explicitly stated to the New York Post, by the way.
He said men are funny differently than women, and he was speaking to averages regarding the biological drive to impress the opposite sex. He was speaking blunt truths about evolutionary psychology, not saying women aren't capable of comedy.
He said women are always the least funny on the writing staff. That's a prejudice that limits his talent pool. But let's pivot, because there is one area where I will grant you he possesses genuine, undeniable expertise. This is the paradox that fascinates me most. We have to talk about the cars.
Finally, yes, because this challenges your narrative that he's just a lazy grumbler or an ignorant loudmouth. Adam Carolla is a world-class automotive historian and a disciplined athlete.
I admit, the collection is impressive.
It's not just a collection, it's a preservation of history. He owns massive pieces of racing heritage, Lamborghini Miuras. He owns 2 of the 76 ever produced. He owns the 1965 350 GT. And he doesn't just polish them in a garage, he races them. He won the pro celebrity race at Long Beach as a professional in 2013 and as an amateur in 2012. Do you know the focus required to handle a vintage race car at speed? You don't do that by being lazy. You do that with focus, precision, and mechanics.
Agreed. It requires a high degree of technical competence.
And he translated that passion into serious filmmaking. The 24-Hour War, his documentary about the Ford versus Ferrari rivalry, co-directed with Nate Adams, is a legitimate piece of cinema. Winning, The Racing Life of Paul Newman, is fantastic. These are not the works of a shock jock, they are the works of a curator. He applies a carpenter's logic to these films. Measure twice, cut once. He treats the subject matter with immense respect.
And that creates a fascinating paradox. Why does he apply Carpenter's logic to an engine but not to society?
What do you mean by that?
When he restores a Lamborghini, he respects the nuance, the history, the engineering. He looks at the manual. He doesn't just smash it with a hammer because he's frustrated. But when he talks about complex social issues, race, gender, poverty, the changing demographics of America, he drops the precision and grabs the sledgehammer. The 24-Hour War was excellent because he respected the subject, but compare that to his narrative film output. Look at The Hammer from 2007.
The Hammer holds an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a great film.
It is. It was semi-autobiographical, empathetic, and sweet. But then look at Road Hard in 2015. It was crowdfunded, yes, but it was essentially a vehicle for him to complain about how hard his life is as a traveling comic. The empathy was gone.
Road Hard was a love letter to the gritty reality of the road. It wasn't supposed to be sweet. It was supposed to be real.
It felt less like a love letter and more like a grievance petition. And the books, Daddy Stop Talking, Everything Reminds Me of Something, they recycled the same complaints about helicopter parenting and participation trophies he's been making since 1999. In the car world, if you don't update the engine, you lose the race. In his comedy, he's running the same engine he had 30 years ago, but the track has changed. He's still complaining about airport security and service dogs, while the world is grappling with AI and climate change.
I would argue the engine is human nature, and human nature doesn't change. Carolla's point about participation trophies was that we are raising a generation unequipped for reality. And look around in 2026. Was he wrong? The mental health crisis, the fragility of public discourse. Maybe the carpenter was right. He measures the world against a standard of toughness and self-reliance that is timeless. You see stagnation, I see a rock in a stream. The water changes, the rock stays put.
But rocks don't grow. And that is the tragedy. He has the quick wit of Loveline. Remember how he could deconstruct a caller's life in 30 seconds? He could diagnose a relationship issue with laser precision. He has the technical mind that appreciates a vintage chassis. But he has allowed his public persona to be captured by a culture war that rewards the most abrasive, least nuanced version of himself.
He has become a caricature of the get-off-my-lawn guy, which is a waste of a genuinely sharp mind.
Or he has remained a steadfast individual in a world that demands conformity. You say he's captured by the culture war. I say he's one of the few combatants willing to fight without a helmet. He's an atheist, a libertarian, a car guy, and a builder. He built a network, he built a collection, and he built a brand that doesn't require your permission to exist. In a media environment where people flip-flop based on the latest trending hashtag, Carolla is consistent. You might not like the shape of the rock, but you cannot deny its solidity.
Solidity can easily be mistaken for calcification. To bring this back to the Walk of Fame and the Trump JFK Center appearance, these bookends of his recent career perfectly illustrate the divide. The Walk of Fame honors the innovator who built the podcast format. The Trump Center appearance highlights the polarized figure he has become.
It highlights that he's willing to show up. That's the essence of the man. He showed up to the job site, he showed up to the boxing gym, and he shows up to the microphone every single day.
Let's try to synthesize this then. Adam Carolla is, without doubt, a pioneer. The personal audio defense alone secures his place in digital media history. We owe him for that. But I maintain that his crusade against cancel culture became a trap. The freedom he champions looks a lot like the freedom to stop listening, to stop evolving, and to preach to the converted. He has transformed from a mainstream comedian who could play in the sandbox with Jimmy Kimmel into a niche culture warrior.
And I maintain he is a necessary corrective. In a media landscape that feels increasingly synthetic, Carolla is the rough grit that proves the surface is real. His abrasive style is simply the price of admission for a voice that is genuinely independent and self-made. Whether you view him as a reactionary relic or a media revolutionary, the fact that we're debating him in 2026 proves one thing: he is impossible to ignore.
On that, we can agree. Thank you for listening to The Debate.